an Accessible Media Incorporated original production.
This program contains embedded descriptive video. It was written to be accessible for blind and low-vision viewers. This is Canada in Perspective, where we take a snapshot of the bigger issues and examine the way they affect you and your community.
Welcome to Canada in Perspective. I'm Anna-Karina Tabuñar. You're out and about and you want to buy a sandwich at a local cafe. Problem is, the shop you want to patronize has entrance doors that you can't open. You can't get your sandwich, the shopkeeper has just lost one customer, and may have gained a violation of the province's Human Rights Code. In Ontario, a provincial law called the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, or AODA, sets new standards for building accessibility. Today, we look at the duty to accommodate.
Okay, let's go.
All right.
I need my blue bag.
Going is a lot tougher for Matt Wizetalik these days. The former high school teacher from Guelph, Ontario, uses a wheelchair as his main mode of mobility due to a neurological disease.
My life was changed. When I stopped walking, things, all of a sudden, there was a barrier. And I didn't realize it as much until I got out of my house in my electric wheelchair. Come on.
Matt found his ability to move about his own community very limited and decided that he would speak up for himself and others in his situation.
You have to be able to stand up to people and say, look, I know what you think, I know what the law is, and this is what I'd like you to do. So it is an educating process.
Wizetalik says he now knows the law better than some lawyers, and this does make a little sense. His fight to make his city accessible has taken him and some local businesses to the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal 3 times. Although he hasn't been successful on all 3 trips, he has spurred change in his hometown.
And I would give the people the credit who put the doors in that I've asked the credit for doing that, because they had to pay for those doors. So I appreciate the fact that they did that.
Want to get your bag? Do you want a bag?
Yes, please.
Duncan McPhee Gift Shop in downtown Guelph has been in Jennifer Mesenberg's family for over 30 years. The store is in a historic building, making accessibility challenging. According to Jennifer, there were some systems in place to make her shop accessible, but it wasn't enough. She was called before the tribunal and had to install an automatic door to make her store accessible.
It was extremely costly for me, with lawyers, the work to be done, my time away from my business that was facing economic difficulty because of construction and just the environment that we're in right now with small businesses. It's a struggle every day.
Marty Williams is the manager of the Downtown Guelph Business Association. He understands the frustrations for his members, like Jennifer, when it comes to accessibility. He believes the problem for retailers isn't the desire to make their business accessible, it's what is required of them.
We don't know if somebody's saying that we need a door opener on a building, does that equal accessibility? Is a doorbell okay for accessibility? Do shelves have to be a certain height? Can we actually have second floors that don't have elevators on them inside of stores? Who gets to determine that? Is it only complaint driven, or is there going to be somebody who comes and says, we've made this determination? Well, if you read AODA, it says don't worry about it, and if you follow what's going on with the Human Rights Tribunal, you better pay attention.
Those questions are less important for Wizetalik. The definition of accessibility for him is more about being able to live his life.
It will make my life a little bit easier by not having to push doors open manually, and perhaps it will help the young women who have strollers, or the older nannies who are walking around, or anyone with a walker or a scooter, etc. Help them as well.
Our panel weighs in on the duty to accommodate in just a moment. Welcome back. Before the break, we heard a few perspectives on making retail stores accessible. What's the impact on businesses and their customers? Well, for their expert perspectives, we have David Lepofsky, a lawyer by trade and the chair of the AODA Alliance. That's an accessibility standards advocacy group. David, welcome to our show.
Great to be here.
And Barbara Hall, joins us. Barbara Hall is former Toronto Mayor and City Councillor. She joins us today as Chief Commissioner of the Ontario Human Rights Commission. Barbara, thank you for coming in.
Good to be here.
And right beside Barbara is John Carew, Executive Director of the Toronto Association of Business Improvement Areas and the voice of Toronto's 35,000 or so businesses. Welcome, John.
Thanks for having us.
Now, I'd like to start off with you, David. Let's start, for the benefit of our viewers right across the country, what does the AODA mean for Ontarians?
The AODA, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, was a law that was passed after we spent 10 years fighting for it right across this province to get this province to become fully accessible to all people with disabilities without us having to sue one barrier at a time under the human rights law. And
you're no stranger to long-running struggles. It was thanks to your long-running efforts that bus stops and subway stops are called out for people with vision loss.
Sighted people can look out the window on the bus to know what stop they're at, but we blind people have to depend on the stops being announced. And before I sued the TTC, they weren't prepared to reliably announce all bus or subway stops.
Now let's switch back to the AODA. I'd like to bring you in on this, Barbara. The AODA and the Human Rights Code are two separate provincial laws. They're different, yet they work together. Could you explain that, please?
Yes, well, the Human Rights Code says that everyone with a disability is entitled to accommodation to the point of undue hardship. So it's possible for people to file complaints if they don't receive accommodation. But the AODA has as its goal really bringing all of Ontario up to the point that allows full inclusion of people with disabilities. So it's about changing a society that wasn't built to be accessible to everything into an inclusive place.
Okay, now John, your organization speaks on behalf of 35,000 businesses. It's a lot of different voices. What are you hearing from your members about the AODA?
Well, there is clearly a mixed reaction. I mean, there are people that advocated to, deal with the stealth way that this was introduced.
The stealth way?
Well, it sort of came out. There was no debate. There was no engagement. Certainly our community wasn't engaged prior to the legislation being put in. We certainly are being engaged and being proactive in consultation as the legislation moves forward. Full implementation of the Act isn't intended till 2025.
Yes. Now, what are your members saying?
Well, members are saying, this is the hardship, as you've heard on the video.
Yes.
There's significant hardship. And yet, the most important thing for us is the lack of clarity and direction. We really don't know, are we in compliance? Are we not in compliance? What are the minimum standards? Unfortunately, the section that is probably the most important, the built form, hasn't been released out to us. We have people that are entering to 5- and 5-year leases now. Who is going to pay for this? Is it going to be the landlord? Is his responsibility to make the building compatible, or is it going to be the tenant who will have to make leasehold improvements? So really our biggest concern out there is clarity and direction so that we fall in, because there's significant opportunity with this for the small business community out there.
David, I'd like to get your response to some of these businesses who...
Let me agree with John on one thing and disagree. Let me start with the disagree part. This law wasn't passed in stealth. If you go to odacommittee.net, you will see that the government held a commendable, very sweeping consultation. It held public hearings on the bill itself, but public forums around the province beforehand. I was at those stakeholder tables when the business sector and the broader public sector were brought together to develop a consensus, which is why the day the bill was introduced for first reading, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce was indicated as being supportive. Now let me agree with John. When John says that there is a lack of guidance, the law is supposed to impose, the province is supposed to develop and impose accessibility standards that let businesses know what they have to do, and municipalities, and when they need to do them by. The government's made some standards, but they haven't made enough of them, and the standards they've enacted aren't detailed enough.
It seems like Barbara needs to jump in here.
Well, I think I agree with both of you to a significant extent. There needs to be a lot more education around this.
And awareness around this,
yes. And we know at the Commission that when people hear accommodation, they're often fearful. They often think about an elevator, the most costly. A lot of what we're talking about has very little cost attached to it and a benefit for everyone. It's a benefit for merchants across Ontario to be able to have businesses that are accessible to all the people who are potential customers. So, okay, now what I'd like to do is share something with you. These are the comments of a business owner who's currently going through the tribunal process. Okay, now this is a direct quote. The current way the tribunal operates, it presumes that the respondent is guilty. Everything, the burden of proof is thrown onto the respondent, and there is no responsibility on the part of the applicant to even be telling the truth. Even if I am fully exonerated by the tribunal, I cannot sue the applicant for costs, and I can't sue for damages, which, if this were a civil court of action, I could do both of those things. Okay, that was a direct quote. David,
let me start by saying what that person is talking about is the Human Rights Code, not the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act.
Okay.
The important thing for people to understand is that the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act doesn't actually require businesses to do anything they aren't already required to do under the Human Rights Code. So every time we encounter a barrier that is to be covered by the Disabilities Act, the Human Rights Code already makes it illegal. It's been illegal since 1982. It's just that enough organizations aren't fully complying. The AODA is there to set standards with input from the disability community and the business community so that people can know exactly what John said, what they need to do and when they need to do it by, without having to go through this kind of costly litigation to find out what the standards are.
Okay, what would it take for a business to appear before the tribunal?
A human rights tribunal involves an applicant having to say, I faced a barrier, and they have the burden to prove that. And then the respondent, the organization who's got the barrier, has to either say, no, we don't, or we've accommodated this person. And they've got the burden to prove that through witnesses, like any trial, like any hearing. But the whole idea is, rather than going through that, to reduce the need to do that, we felt that there should be an avenue for setting standards with input from business, from the community of people with disabilities, from the broader public sector, give people the time they need to make reasonable adjustments, and then have enforcement if you don't comply with those standards.
Okay.
And the idea is this: the barriers that folks with disabilities face trying to get into a business hurt the business, not just the person with disability.
Right.
They want our money. They want us spending money there. They need us as employees. Nobody would want to cut 17 or 18% of the public out as a possible source of employees. There's a lot of really talented people there.
Absolutely, and there is absolutely no disagreement there, but we need to take a brief pause on this conversation. We will be right back in just a moment, and we'll talk about the next steps toward a barrier-free community. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're taking a closer look at the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, or AODA. Now, let's start off with John. So just before the break, we heard about the process, the litigation, and I want to get your perspective as a business owner.
Well, the perspective is really, why Americanize this thing? Why litigate? Is there not an opportunity at some point, once a deficiency, if you will, is identified within a business and it's registered, that that business has an opportunity to correct or make necessary adjustments to their property, to their business, before being dragged into effectively a tribunal where you have costs that are associated with defending yourself or any of that?
That's actually the model we have here, is exactly what John is saying. I agree with him. Let's first give people the opportunity to comply and set standards that tell them what needs to be done. But if they still don't comply, you've got to enforce the law, because it's not Americanizing to say everybody has to obey the law, especially when obeying the law is good for the business because they're going to make more money.
The good news is that many business owners are doing this on their own before the AODA.
Because it makes good business sense, as we've all established.
Because it makes good business sense. And they've gone out and learned what is necessary to give people access, and they've taken steps to put in place.
Okay, now let me ask you this, Barbara. What advice would you give to a small business owner in order to avoid being taken to the Human Rights Tribunal?
Well, to understand what the barriers in their business are and to explore how to get rid of those barriers. And there's often no single way to do that. There are different ways. There's the perfect way and less perfect ways that still provide access. There are intervening or other issues like heritage and whatever.
Right,
and so it's
right.
bringing all of
So heritage buildings, you mean?
all of the information together and finding the way that lets people use the business.
Can I just add one thing to this, which is you've been asking about small business. The 2 points I want to make that are really important. Firstly, some of the major barriers we face are not the product of small business. It's big business and big government.
All right.
So that when the Ontario government creates the Presto smart card so that we can all pay our transit fares with one card, but they build it, they design it in a way that's inaccessible to people like me who are blind. If we're at a station, want to check the fare, you got to be able to read a screen. That's not small business. That's not business at all. It's government, and then the government pressures various municipalities to implement this without fixing it first. So that it's wrong to think about this as small business and mainly or only. And the other thing is the standards that are enacted under the Disabilities Act can and do set different requirements for small business than they do for big business, taking into account they're small, that you can expect less of them, and that they need more time to be done. So this isn't and never has been one size fits all. But in the end, the really important message from all of this, which I think we're all agreeing on, is on the one hand, removing and preventing barriers against customers and employees with disabilities is good for business, and it's good for the government, and it's good for our economy.
So staying with you, David, in your view, how does the AODA measure up so far?
We're behind schedule. It's got the right ingredients, but the government has done an ineffective job. It's done some good things, but it's done an ineffective job. It's too slow, and in the past 2 years, it's ground to a virtual halt in coming up with next steps for implementation.
Was that?
Well, there was an independent review that the government itself appointed 3 years ago, and it reported that while the government celebrated the enactment of this law back in 2005, it went on to other business, and it just went back to business as usual. And that report recommended the provincial government had to show new leadership, revitalize the implementation of this law, and breathe new life into it.
Now,
that's the government's own self-appointed reviewer concluded that. We agree, but the government hasn't followed the advice of the person they appointed to do that review.
Barbara, you wanted to weigh in?
Sorry, that leaves our community,
the business
Main
community.
Street retailer, whether it's small or big, and
Right.
I absolutely agree with David, in a quandary. You know, what are the standards? Where are we going? What is our obligation so that we don't have litigation brought against us? Times are tough enough out there for Main Street retail, from, you know, big box, the Walmart and Target phenomenon, the e-commerce and everything else that's out there, that it leaves us in a quandary. And the clearer and the quicker that we can deal with this and provide us some direction, or use the word education on this. Every year we have conferences for the small business communities across this province, and every year this is one of the top topics. Am I in compliance? What do I need to do to move out there? And David, you hit that proverbial nail right on the head. The government has let us down on this thing. They celebrated in 2005. We all got engaged. We put out publications trying to bring our folks in the 21st century, and they dropped the ball.
Now, so Barbara, we know that you know government very well. Please.
Well, we all agree on the goal. I think most people in society agree
That's a non-issue.
on the goal. That's a non-issue. So the question really is, how do we get there?
And how do we plug the gaps?
And how do we fill the gaps? And education is a piece of that. Business people are right to want to understand the bottom line. And are we in compliance under the AODA? How does that line up against the Human Rights Code? And those are legitimate questions. And I think all of us have a responsibility, the government included, to answer those questions for people, so that people can meet the goal, achieve the target they want to have, which is an inclusive society.
What's amazing from this panel is that we're showing that the old mythology is wrong. The old mythology is that John and I should be arguing. It should be disability community versus business. But we're not. We actually agree on everything. About we need the law, we need clear standards, people should have a chance to be given the right tools to comply. But on the other hand, if somebody still won't comply when you've given them all that, that's where you have to have enforcement available.
David, I want to ask you this. So suppose I can't get into the store of my choice. What course of action would you suggest to me?
Well, we can't give people legal advice. Right now, they've got two options. They can file an individual human rights complaint if they feel that they've got grounds, but that's a protracted and challenging process. Most people don't want it. Believe me, having taken on the TTC not once but twice, and having had them spend $450,000 on lawyers to oppose me, it's not fun. But on the other hand, the other option is to, in Ontario, is to go to the government and say, would you please effectively implement the Disabilities Act? Get all the standards enacted that we need created. Could you please provide better tools to business so they know what they got to do to comply? And we need the effective enforcement the government promised for those who, even once educated, and even when given the tools, still won't comply.
Or how about this? Maybe I try to have a conversation with the business owner.
Well, obviously, that's the first step for anyone. That predates any of this. That predates any of this.
And that goes a long way before we litigate, absolutely. The other thing is we need to set some precedents in terms of what is precedent in terms of heritage properties. You know, Guelph was an example.
Well, let me talk about...
Will we have grandfathering that some properties just can't be dealt with to meet the widths of doors, etc., without damaging the heritage intent of those properties? And the other thing is there is a number of municipalities across this kind of downtown specifically where we have grades and 2 or 3 steps to get into the property, yet they have a 5-foot sidewalks.
Yes.
If we applied a 2% grade on a ramp, we'd be in the middle of Main Street to accommodate that. So how do we deal with that? And are we
so I need to give, I will give the last word to Barbara. I'm so sorry, John. Barbara, last word to you.
Well, so much of this is resolved if people talk, conversation.
Like today.
Like today, and like somebody who can't get into a business, talking with the business owner and figuring out a way that their needs can be accommodated, taking into account the grade and all the other issues.
Okay, so that is all the time we have, and I want to thank you so much, all three of you, for your perspectives. David Lepofsky, Barbara Hall, and John Carew. Thank you so much. And we'd always like to hear from you, our audience. Please drop us an email at cip@ami.ca. And to learn more about our original programming, visit our website, ami.ca. From all of us here, thank you for watching.
Host and contributing editor Anna-Karina Tabuñar. Producers Andrew Morris, Jason White. Studio producer and technical director Jono Nemeth. Supervising producer Andrew Morris. Videographer Arthur Presick. Director of photography Josh Power. Studio camera Peter O'Hara, Donnie Rose. Narration Mark Bielkowski, William Hunt. Set design Punch Clock Limited. Editors Miriam Bakhtiar, Mike Barber. Audio post Santiago Moffat. Graphics Mike Smith, Jeffrey Chung. Music Bruce Baclarian, Santiago Moffat. Production coordinator Janice Civitilli. Special thanks Barbara Hall, John Carew, David Lepofsky, Matthew Wozenilek, Jennifer Mesenberg, Marty Williams, Afrose Edwards, Jamie Burton, Kirby Chown, Duncan McPhee Gift Shop, Downtown Guelph Business Association, Dolphin Digital Technologies Incorporated, Adamus, Anna-Karina's Wardrobe provided by Hudson's Bay. For more information, visit their website at thebay.com. Copyright 2013, Accessible Media Incorporated.